everybody. How is your day going? You're welcome to another episode of Legal Clues on Emirate Radio. As you know, on Legal Clues, we bring you legal tips that will help you to be intentional about living a crime-free life, and we help you to make informed decisions in life, to run away from crime, to know your rights and obligations, and some other things you need to be aware of as citizens of Nigeria. My name is Damilola Obadimeji, your host on this program. And on today's episode, we'll be discussing the topic human trafficking. Human trafficking. I'm sure a lot of us would have heard about human trafficking one way or the other. And some of us might probably not know the meaning, but you would have understood how it relates, how it works from one end of life to the other. But for us to be so much abreast of it and to be aware so that we'll not fall victims, that is why we are here this morning, to talk about it, for everyone to be aware. What is human trafficking? We all know that human trafficking is common around us. It's very important for every one of us to be aware of it. Whether old or young, anyone can fall victim. So the earlier we understand what it is, the earlier we are fully aware and self-aware, the better for us. Being aware will help us to save a lot of lives, and to also help us to combat human trafficking. Of course, we're in an era where a lot of people want to jackpot, like people will say. A lot of people want to run out of the country because of the situation of the country. So we all need to be careful of juicy promises that could be devastating to our lives. A lot of people will come as helpers, sometimes promising to help you, probably to relocate, and sometimes promising to bear the expenses for you. Some of these people could be traffickers in disguise, and we might not know. Hence, there is need to be careful as individuals, and of course as parents, because even children are victims of human trafficking. What is human trafficking? In a layman's language, I can say human trafficking is a way of recruiting, transporting, transferring or harboring people by force or through fraud or deception with the aim of exploiting them for profit. So let me simply put it like this, that human trafficking is an unlawful act of transporting people or coercing people in order to benefit from their work or service. And of course, it's very common. It's usually in the form of forced labor or sexual exploitation. So human trafficking can come in a lot of ways, but the most common thing that the most common forms of human trafficking are usually to sexually exploit the person or to force the person into labor. We have various types of human trafficking. They are very common. There are basically three types that are common here. The first one is sex trade. The second one is forced labor. And of course, we have domestic servitude. There are other types, of course, of human trafficking, but we want to just limit ourselves to these three. We have other types, could be organ buying or selling. Some people traffic people for the purpose of selling their organs or buying their organs, harvesting their organ. Some traffic people for forced marriage, for surrogacy, and the likes of it. So we have different types of human trafficking, ranging from sex trade, forced labor, domestic servitude, of course, organ buying and selling, forced marriage, and surrogacy. But for the purpose of today's discussion, we're going to limit ourselves to these three, which is sex trade, forced labor, and domestic servitude. Now, when we talk about sex trafficking is a form of human trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. It can be called a form of modern day slavery because of the ways that victims are forced into sexual acts. Most times it is not consensual. It's non-consensual, of course, in form of sexual slavery. Some people will come as helpers, help some young girls, beautiful young girls, to process their traveling, promise them greener pasture, promise them that they will bear the expenses, but when they get there, they use them for sex trade. They collect money, they will make them sleep with men for money, and they will be the one to be collecting the money, of course, without their consent. This is a form of human trafficking. Therefore, any individual that is working as escort and is doing so under any kind of fraud or force or coercion is a victim of what we call sex trafficking. Now, there are stages to sex trafficking. It doesn't just start like that. It starts from what we call luring. Of course, you will not know that they are trying to lure you, but that's what they are doing. They are coming with juicy promises for you. Then they groom you. Then to the stage of gaming, then up to the stage of coercion, where they coerce you without, of course, with force, without your consent, then to manipulation and exploitation. That manipulation and exploitation is the recruitment stage where you start doing the sex trade for them, and they'll be the one to be collecting your money. In luring stage, like I said, sex traffickers approach victims in various ways. It could include pretending to be potential boyfriend, friend, helper, all to test the victim's vulnerabilities and boundaries. When they are doing this, they want to know your vulnerabilities and your boundaries. Luring could be through social media. We're in an era where a lot of people are on social media. We've seen cases where young girls meet young guys on social media. They become friends. You think he's actually your friend, and without knowing his intention, his motive to being your friend, sometimes they are there to check, to know your vulnerabilities and your boundaries, to be able to know when to strike. Social media always allow easy access for predators to connect with naive and needy victims. So all these naive and needy victims, of course, they know your areas that you need something. They will have been your friend. You will have told them some things, and they will be able to use it against you. So social media allows easy access for predators to connect with naive and needy victims. And of course, when it gets to the grooming and the gaming stage, the trafficker will do anything to make the victim at ease with them, either to love them, to trust them. They will leave you no doubt. You'll be so comfortable with them that you will find it difficult to nurse any idea of them trafficking you or of them taking advantage of you. So you will not doubt their genuineness. You will think they are indeed genuine. They are good friends, good boyfriend, good helper, not knowing that there are some other things or other motives that they have behind that pretense. And of course, coercion and the manipulation stage. In this stage, the trafficker will use information that he has gathered about you to take advantage. The traffickers will try to convince the victim that if they do not do what they want, the victims will not, will not get to good old times. So those are all lies. They will try to manipulate you in a way that you believe what they are saying, but they're all lies. Then we'll now move to the exploitation stage, where the traffickers will have only broken the victim. They will have broken the victim's self-esteem down. They will either emotionally, psychologically, physically, they will manipulate their victim and force them into sex work. That is what they do. They will have broken you down. You cannot run back because you will now be at their mercy. And then it will now lead to the recruitment stage where they would fully manipulate the victim into working for them and making them into full-blown sex workers. So by that, whatever money they are getting from you belongs to them, while the victim will be, carrying out the sexual activities. You're listening to Legal Clues on Emirate Radio. Sit back, relax. We'll be right back. You're welcome back to Legal Clues on Emirate Radio. Of course, we are talking about human trafficking. For the purpose of people just joining us, we have discussed what human trafficking is. And of course, in a layman's language, we have said it is an unlawful act of transporting or coercing people in order to benefit from their work or service, usually in the form of forced labor or sexual exploitation. Now, we have said that human trafficking can come in different forms. It can be for the purpose of sex trade, for the purpose of forced labor, for the purpose of domestic servitude, for the purpose of organ buying or selling, forced marriage or surrogacy. Now, we have talked about sex trade, what sex trade is, the stages to sex trade, and we have said that all this, the predators, the trafficker, are only looking for ways to get their victims to be so comfortable with them, not to doubt their genuineness before they strike, and of which their motive is usually a very, very bad one. Now, moving to the next form of human trafficking, which is forced labor. What is forced labor? Like the name connotes, you are forced into labor, forced to do work that you don't want to do. A forced labor is any work or service which is exerted from any person under the threat of a penalty and for which the person has not offered himself or herself voluntarily. So in forced labor, it's of course not you do not give your consent, but that work is exerted from you by force. You are not giving yourself up for it voluntarily, but you are being forced to do it. So in forced labor, there are usually threats, of course, and there are elements to it. You have 3 elements to determine whether it is a forced labor or not. The first one is that the work or service that you are doing, any type of work at all. Forced labor can involve any type of work at all, whether to wash, domestic, or any form of work at all. Then the menace of any penalty. Some people will tell you, if you don't do this, this is the consequences. Then you're being forced. If you have consequences awaiting you when you don't do a particular work, then it's forced labor. You're being forced. A wide range of penalties can be used to compel the person to work in forced labor. And of course, the third one is involuntariness. So that means you are not giving your consent. These 3 things are what we'll be able to use to determine whether it is actually a forced labor or not. The first one is that any work at all that I've said, you can be forced to do any type of work. The second one is that there is a menace of any penalty. There are wide ranges of penalties they will use to compel you. If you don't do this, this is the consequences. Of course, if it's not forced, you don't have to have consequences for not doing a particular thing. But once there are consequences, you're being forced to do it. And the third one, of course, is that it is not voluntary. You are not giving your consent. This is also another form of human trafficking. We have seen cases where they ship people abroad to do some jobs that they're not proud of. The third form of human trafficking is domestic servitude. And of course, we know domestic servitude. It's a crime in which a domestic worker is not free to leave his or her employment. So domestic servitude, you are like a servant. It can be said to be a crime, like I said, in which a domestic worker is not free to leave his or her employment. The person is abused, sometimes underpaid, that is, even if paid at all. So when in domestic servitude, you are being made to work domestically, sometimes like house helps, you've also seen cases like that, without being paid. It is a condition in which individual lacks the liberty, especially to determine his or her course of action in life. You can't decide for yourself. You lack that liberty. You can't go anywhere on your own. You are like a servant chained to a particular, job or domestic work. So those are just, some things that human traffickers can make the victims go through. So domestic work situation becomes trafficking when the employer uses force or fraud or coercion to maintain a certain form of control over the worker and to cause the worker to believe that he or she has no other choice but to continue to work. So it becomes servitude, a domestic servitude, where you have no right of no liberty of your own, and they are using force or coercion or fraud to make you believe that they have this control over you and that you cannot leave. You have no other choice but to continue to work there. That's also a form of human trafficking. Like I said, there are other forms of human trafficking that can also be a form of organ harvesting and selling. For organ trafficking, we've seen cases where some people will transport another individual for the purpose of harvesting the person's organ, whether kidney, liver, without the person's consent. There's a popular case that some people were convicted over because of that, where they believe that they transport a certain man, a certain young guy, for the purpose of harvesting his organ. So it happens. Human traffickers can also transport people for the purpose of harvesting their organs. It's not only for domestic servitude alone, or sex trade or forced labor. Sometimes it is to harvest their organ. Is a crime. It's criminal in nature. It's a crime. Human trafficking generally is a crime. It's a crime against the state. It's a crime against humanity. It's a crime that we should not find ourselves doing. And of course, there are other forms again that can also be surrogacy. Some people traffic for the purpose of making a woman a surrogate for them. I believe we all know what surrogacy means. Like, you make a woman, carry your pregnancy for you to term. Probably There are some cases that some women cannot carry pregnancies to term. It's legal sometimes when they have a surrogacy contract with a woman to carry the pregnancy to term for them, but it becomes human trafficking, where it's against the person's consent. You traffic somebody, you probably transport somebody or coerce the person into carrying your pregnancy for you. It is a crime. So it's also another form of human trafficking. Sometimes it's also in a way to carry out a forced marriage on a non-consensual person. So these are forms that human trafficking can take. And now, who are those that can be victims of human trafficking? Everybody, anyone at all can be victim of human trafficking. Anybody can be a victim. Children can be victims. Women can be victims. Men can be victims. Teenagers can be victims. Anybody at all, from any race, any religious upbringing, anybody at all can be a victim of human trafficking. So victims of human trafficking can be anybody, regardless of your race, regardless of your color, regardless of your national origin, regardless of your religion, regardless of your age, your gender, or your socio-economic status. So anyone at all can be victims of human trafficking. And what are the elements of human trafficking? What will make you know that this is human trafficking? The first one is the act itself. Any action that includes recruiting you, transporting you, transferring you, harboring you, or receiving you. Any act, I come again, any act at all that includes people recruiting people, transporting them, transferring them, harboring or receiving persons. Another element is the means by which the act is being done. The means, which will include threat or force or coercion. It could also be by fraud or deception or abuse of power or vulnerability. This is also an element of human trafficking. And the third one is the purpose. This is it means that the person, the intention, what they intend to use the person for. What the person intends to use the victim for, such as maybe forced labor that we said earlier, sex trade, domestic servitude, etc. So when these three things are present, it will help you to know that this is human trafficking. They want to recruit you or transfer you somewhere, transport you, harbor you or receive you through force or through coercion or by deception or by abuse of power or your vulnerability for some jobs that should not, that ordinarily you will not consent to. These are the three elements that will make you to know that this is human trafficking. So peradventure you have people trying to help you and you are looking at those things, they want to force you or they are deceiving you, sweet mouthing you. Of course, you will know that you should be careful. This might just be a bait, so you should be careful. And what are the effects of human trafficking on victims? Effects could also be the impact that human trafficking has on people. And the impact of human trafficking on victims is very serious. And it ranges from mental health consequences. Imagine somebody that was trafficked for the purpose of sex trade. Probably she has to sleep with about 5-10 men a day. It's going to affect the person mentally. The lady cannot be normal again, except of course if she undergoes some kind of therapy. So it affects their mental health. It brings about mental health consequences. Another impact is loss of basic human rights. Your rights are not guaranteed. You are not at liberty to do what ordinarily you should be able to do. You don't have the rights guaranteed under the Constitution for you any longer. Your liberty is being withdrawn. The impact is severe. Another impact is loss of childhood or life. Probably a young girl that was trafficked abroad, spending majority of her prime, the major time of her prime in servitude. They have deprived such person of the person's childhood. And if he's an adult, you have to spend years in this servitude. They have deprived the person of the person's life. Disruption in families. Sometimes you cannot have contact with your close family members anymore. And sometimes they never get to see their families again for life. So the impact is severe. It can also bring about devastating psychological consequences. Some people, it's not only their mental health that will be affected. Some people will be behaving like mad people because of what they have undergone. Imagine some people that, like I said earlier, that maybe about 5 or 10 men had to sleep with every day Of course, they can be normal. So the effects of human trafficking on victim is always very severe. It can also lead to physical health issues like bruises, wounds, diseases, infections, and a host of it. It can also lead to fear or trauma in victims. That is why we see some situations where victims of sex trade, sometimes when they've undergone therapy and they're okay, sometimes are afraid of men. They don't even want to come close to men. And like that, that's just an example. And like that, so it can lead to fear and trauma in victims. It can also cause victims to be more isolated. Some people will be withdrawn. They will withdraw. They won't want to relate again. Their social life will not be balanced any longer. It can lead to physical and sexual violence. It can lead, sometimes extreme cases, to memory loss. In the bid that the person does not want to remember what he or she has undergone, it can lead to memory loss. It can lead to sexually transmitted diseases. It can lead to depression, anxiety, and of course a host of other effects. So effects of human trafficking on victims is always very, very severe. And that is why we said it is a crime against humanity, and it is a crime, of course, against the state, against government. So is human trafficking a crime? Some people say, I just help the person to get a job. Is it a crime? Of course, human trafficking is a serious crime. It is a grave human rights violation offense. You are violating another individual's human rights. That is a serious crime. It's also, like I said, also a crime against humanity. It is something that we should not find ourselves doing. It's a serious crime against human being, against another human being. You're violating their right. A grave human right violation, and a crime, of course, against humanity. We have some laws that provide for punishment for traffickers. For example, we have the Trafficking in Persons Law Enforcement and Administration Act of 2003. So human trafficking is a crime that has the laws regulating that even prescribe for punishment. We have also Child Rights Act of 2003, and of course other laws against human trafficking. So Trafficking in Persons Prohibition and Administration Act of 2015 is what is in force. It was firstly enacted in 2003 and of course reenacted in 2015. So for example, in case you suspect human trafficking, what should you do? Probably you suspect around you that this situation, this arrangement with another person is not normal. What should you do? The first thing to do, if it's in your case or another person, get help. Report such what you have suspected to the appropriate quarters. Report. How will you report? In Nigeria, we have what we call NAPTIP. It's the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons. NAPTIP. It's everywhere. Even when you browse them, you will get their contact. You get helplines online. Try to get help. Report any case of human trafficking that you suspect or you see around you. NAPTIP will investigate cases of trafficking in persons. And of course, they will enforce the Trafficking in Persons Act against any violator that they are found to be guilty. Here in Kwara, we also have NAPTIP. So it's almost in all the states of the country. You can search it around, Google it, you get their helplines, get help in case you suspect that there is human trafficking happening around you. So in all, it is important to know that human trafficking is wrong and how to help freed victims. Peradventure, there are people that have undergone human trafficking, that have been victims of human trafficking, and God has helped them. God has rescued them. They've been rescued. How can we be of help to them? The basic thing that we can do for them ranges from provision of basic things like food, clothing, and the likes of it, or even shelter. Some people, it is poverty that led them into being victims in the first place. They can't afford basic necessities of life. They can't afford to feed well. They don't have shelters over their head, and that is how they were able to be victims of this thing. So the first thing we can do to help victims that has been freed is to provide basic things for them, like food, clothing, shelter, and of course every other basic amenities that they will need. Another thing we can do for them is to provide like recreational activities for them to help them forget the trauma that they have gone through. We can also help them by giving them vocational training Some of them you can help them probably to learn one handiwork or the other, tailoring, hairdressing, and a host of it, for them to be able to be self-reliant. When they finish learning, they can be set up, to be able to be self-reliant. We can also give them psychological counseling. Some people have gone through so many terrible things that they need counseling to be able to come out of it well, to be able to relate well again like a human being. They need counseling to be able to socialize again, so we can provide psychological counseling for them. Also, we can give them safety by reuniting them with their families. Some have been withdrawn from their families, and we can help them. We can safely reunite them with their families. These and a host of other things are the things we can do to help freed victims of human trafficking. So in all, we should know that human trafficking is a crime. When you suspect it around you, please report it. Let us all be watchful and careful. Let us report cases of suspected trafficking. Let us help in combating this crime against humanity. And parents, please, let's be watchful. Don't let us just release our children to people for the purpose of just because they want to help. Investigate, understand that this is what they want to use your child for. Don't just release your child anyhow. The world is a terrible place. People do terrible things now. As much as the world is also a beautiful place, of course, but the terrible people in it makes it sometimes terrible to live in. So you should be careful as parents. Please monitor our children. Let's monitor our children properly. Let us be careful of juicy promises that are too good, of course, to be true. And in all, everybody, as of course citizens of this country, let's join hands together to combat this crime against humanity. This is where we'll be heading to this episode on Legal Clues. Like I always say, let us be intentional about living a crime-free life. And until next week, when I will be here again to meet you by the grace of God to bring you another exciting legal topic on Legal Clues, please be safe and have a blessed week ahead of you. God bless you all.